Hello, welcome back to Cartoon Philosophy, the channel where we take your favorite cartoons, rip them open like frogs in a high school biology lab, and then explain why the guts are actually your own. So today's big question, is Rigby just lazy, or is he living in existential burnout? Spoiler, it's both. But let's pretend it's complicated, because that's what philosophy majors do. Rigby the fool stereotype. At first glance, Rigby is your standard issue fool. The clown, the screw-up, the guy who ruins everything. He's lazy, selfish, impulsive, and allergic to anything that looks like responsibility. The fandom consensus is simple. Rigby's dumb. Rigby's a loser. Rigby's the reason Benson screams into a blood vessel every episode. But here's the thing. Calling Rigby lazy is a cop-out. It's like labeling Hamlet indecisive. Sure, it's technically true, but it ignores the pathology underneath. What looks like laziness on the surface can actually be the symptom of something deeper, something existential, maybe even tragic. Rigby as avoidant personality. In psychoanalytic terms, Rigby displays classic avoidant defense mechanisms. Avoidance isn't about not caring, it's about caring too much and running away from the weight of it. Rigby fears failure. He fears responsibility. And rather than risk being crushed by either, he opts out. He'd rather be the lazy guy than the guy who tried and failed. This is the if I don't try, I can't fail defense, also known as defensive failure. It's like self-sabotage, but dressed in sweatpants. Rigby preemptively accepts the identity of the screw-up because it's safer than facing the abyss of expectation. So when he drops out of school, when he tanks jobs, when he torpedoes Mordecai's attempts at maturity, it's not just laziness. It's the pathology of avoidance. Sartre and bad faith. Existential psychology has a term for this too, bad faith. Sartre described it as the refusal to accept one's freedom, the denial of choice, the retreat into excuses like, that's just the way I am. Rigby is textbook bad faith. He hides behind laziness so he never has to admit he's capable of more. He builds his whole identity on being the fool because as long as he's the clown, no one expects him to grow up. And isn't that the fantasy? To avoid responsibility forever? To live in an endless adolescence, where the biggest consequence of your actions is Benson yelling for 30 seconds? But bad faith has a cost. Stagnation. Rigby doesn't grow, because growth requires accountability. And accountability requires the horrifying admission that you have choices, and that you're responsible for them. Rigby and Mordecai. The toxic dynamic. Let's not ignore the buddy system here. Mordecai tries. Sort of. He wants relationships, he wants to be taken seriously. He's the one towing the line between adolescence and adulthood. Rigby? He sabotages that at every turn. This isn't coincidence. It's classic projective identification. Rigby can't tolerate watching Mordecai grow because it exposes his own refusal to. So he drags Mordecai back into the swamp of irresponsibility, turning every potential moment of growth into chaos. And Mordecai lets him, which is a whole other psychological case file we'll save for another episode. Burnout before the career. Now let's talk about burnout. Normally, burnout comes after prolonged responsibility, work stress, career exhaustion, parenting overload. But Rigby is burned out before he's even started. This is called existential burnout. It's not the exhaustion of doing too much. It's the exhaustion of facing too much possibility and choosing to do nothing. It's paralysis. Rigby embodies the burnout of having infinite potential paths and zero courage to take any of them. In other words, he's tired of life before he's lived it. That's why he hides in video games, naps, and sabotage. It's not laziness. It's a retreat from freedom itself. Freud and the pleasure principle. Freud would look at Rigby and shrug. Pleasure principle. Rigby seeks pleasure, avoids pain, and never tolerates frustration. He's pure ID, all desire, no discipline. but even Freud might admit it's more complicated. Rigby's not just avoiding pain. He's avoiding the superego. The superego whispers, grow up, get a job, be responsible. Rigby drowns it out with antics because listening to it would mean admitting he's failed to live up to anything. The existential joke. Here's the cruel punchline. Rigby is relatable. Because who hasn't avoided a responsibility? Not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much. Who hasn't procrastinated to the point of collapse, paralyzed by the possibility of failing if you even try? Rigby is the comedy mask hiding the tragedy. He's us when we doom scroll instead of writing the essay. He's us when we binge Netflix instead of answering emails. He's us when we choose inaction over the crushing weight of accountability. And that's why calling him just lazy misses the point. Rigby is not lazy. Rigby is all of us, staring into the abyss of expectation and saying, nah, dude, I'll pass. Why it matters. So is Rigby lazy, or is he an existential burnout? The answer is yes. Both. Always. He's the cartoon embodiment of avoidance, bad faith, and preemptive burnout. And that makes him more than just comic relief. It makes him a mirror of our own cowardice. We laugh at him not because he's so different from us, but because he's so familiar. He's the part of us that wants to opt out. The part that hides behind excuses. The part that would rather be the fool than risk responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most honest character in regular show. This has been Cartoon Philosophy. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into cartoons, psychology, and the absurd tragedy of fictional slackers. Or don't. Rigby would probably prefer you didn't.